Hey guys, tonight we float not through dreams just yet, but across a lake older than most legends. You're wrapped in a rough cotton cloak, chilled by the midnight mist that slips between the reeds and coils like smoke around your ankles. You don't see the stars overhead, not because they're gone, but because your focus is drawn downward to the water, which reflects them more patiently than the sky ever could. There's a hush, a true hush, as if the very air remembers what it was like before cities came, before conquest, before noise. Tonight, you are drifting on the black mirror of Lake Xochimilco, the same waters the Aztecs once glided across. The canoe creaks softly beneath you, more reed than wood, more basket than boat. You trail a hand through the surface, and it's warm silken, deceptively still. But beneath it, things move. Not creatures, though a fish flicks here and there, but thoughts, old solutions to old problems buried in mud and ingenuity. You probably wouldn't survive this world if we're being honest. Your modern thumbs, your need for cell reception, your complete inability to identify edible duckweed. But you're here anyway, so you might as well lean back. The lake isn't judging you. The mosquitoes might be, but the lake. She only whispers. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to, like the please subscribe to my channel, and share your location and local time, only if you genuinely enjoy my content. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You pass silently beneath an arch of willow trees. The boughs dip low, as if offering blessings, or perhaps gossip. Your guide, a man, wrapped in layers of wool dyed dull teal and russet rose, with a carved paddle that murmurs against the water like a tongue reciting ancient poetry. He does not speak. This hour does not ask for conversation. Instead, you listen. To your left, a frog belches with the seriousness of a judge. To your right, reeds rustle like secrets between sisters. And somewhere ahead, fireflies blink in strange rhythms, maybe messages, maybe just dancing. There's something odd about this place. Not eerie, but suspended. As if this part of the world didn't get the memo that time was supposed to march. It prefers to ripple. Or maybe it prefers to root like everything else here. Because yes, beneath you, even in this midnight float, you're crossing not just water, but invisible seams where floating farms once swelled with maize beans and squash. The famed Chinampas Islands that weren't islands but gardens tethered to dreams and mud. You ease up against one now. It looks like land, smells like land, but lean too far, and your elbow slides into something slick. These gardens were engineered layer by layer, wicker frames, lake muck, decomposing weeds, then more lake mud. Like lasagna, but less edible, unless you're really into duck poo topsoil. Mainstream historical fact, the Aztecs built Chinampas to feed their booming capital, Tenochtitlan. These floating farms could yield up to 7 crops a year, outproducing most old world techniques. They weren't just brilliant, they were beautiful. Rows of green, mirrored by blue. A checkerboard for gods to gaze upon. But there's more to it, there always is. You disembark without a sound. The mud sucks gently at your sandal. You half expect the island to wobble, but it doesn't. It's secure, moored with willow stakes, and the roots of crops that grip tighter than guilt. Your guide crouches and scoops water into a cracked ceramic bowl. You can see stars reflected in the ripples. For a second, it looks like he's holding the sky. The air here smells like crushed mint and damp straw, and something else, an earthy tang that could be moss or algae, or just the memory of 1,000 growing seasons whispering through soil. You crouch too beside the rows. The maize leaves gleam in moonlight, their edges kissed silver. The plants are spaced with reverence, no wasted inches, no greedy reach. They live like monks in green cassocks, disciplined and alert. You touch the soil, it's warm, alive. Quirky tidbit. Some farmers used floating duckweed compost to enrich the soil. A green slime scraped lovingly from canal surfaces and layered into chinampa beds like frosting. Smelly, yes, but potent. Even the ducks approved, occasionally waddling over to donate fresh material for next season's enrichment. A breeze drifts by. It smells faintly of cocoa shells and lake wind. You lie back on the edge of the Chinampa, eyes on the stars, ears filled with the occasional hoot or distant splash, and still you wonder, how did they know? How did the Aztecs figure out how to farm on water? Historians still argue whether these techniques were entirely Aztec innovations or refined adaptations of even earlier cultures like the Teotihuacanos or the Chalca. The truth, as usual, floats somewhere in the middle, muddy but buoyant. You yawn, not from boredom, but from the natural seduction of a night spent with still water and old knowledge. Your thoughts feel loamy now, root-bound and thick with stories. You wonder how many generations tended this very patch, whether someone once fell in love right where your elbow rests, whether a duck ever stole a necklace and hid it in the reeds. Probably. Ducks are petty thieves. The candle in your mind flickers lower. The reeds sway like lullabies, and the island beneath you so firm, so engineered, rocks ever so slightly. A heartbeat of land that never quite forgot it came from water. You breathe deep. In, out, stillness, just the moon, the maze, and a world that refused to drown. You stretch gently, not to wake the sleeping soil, or rustle too much of the moonlight pooling in dew. The Chinampa holds your weight like a cradle. Odd, isn't it? Something made from reeds mud and swamp-bottom confidence can feel steadier than a memory foam mattress. You're not in a modern city anymore. You're in a system built by hands that never wasted movement, where every canal was carved with intention and every tree had a job. Speaking of trees, notice those slim straight willows that line the edges of the Chinampa. They're not just ornamental. These were planted as anchors. As the floating gardens grew compacted layers of woven reeds and muck, they needed something to tether them to the lakebed and to each other. Willow trees were perfect, fast-growing, flexible, and willing to live with wet feet. You pad along the edge of the garden sandals, brushing moist grass. The ground is springy underfoot like a very old sponge that somehow never smells bad. The lake glistens on both sides, reflecting not just stars now, but the gradual stretch of morning pink and orange, beginning to flirt with the horizon. You duck beneath an arch of maize stalks. Their tassels glisten with dew, and every breath feels perfumed with chlorophyll and sun promise. You kneel to touch the earth again. This time, the soil feels firmer, richer. That's not an accident. Mainstream historical fact. Chinampa farmers didn't just hope for fertility, they engineered it. They would dredge nutrient-rich sludge from the bottom of the canals and add it back into the garden beds. This cycle, mud to root to mud again, turned what seemed like a swamp into one of the most productive agricultural systems in history. And here's something delightfully weird. Many farmers marked the passage of time, not by the moon or the sun, but by how fast the duckweed came back. There was an unspoken rhythm to it. Scrape, wait, stir, reap. It's the kind of schedule that doesn't show up in calendar apps but somehow feels more reliable. You're not alone out here, by the way. Further down the canal, a family is already awake. A man in a cotton tunic guides his canoe, forward pole in hand. A girl no older than 10 tosses duckweed into a woven basket. A woman, maybe the grandmother, sits cross-legged beside a pile of harvested beans, sorting them by touch alone. They don't look up, not out of rudeness, but because they already know you're here. Not you exactly, but the idea of the visitor. These farms have received guests for centuries: egrets, mosquitoes, gods, tourists, time travelers. You're just the next pair of eyes. They speak softly to each other in Nahuatl, the words rising and falling like birdsong over water. You catch phrases you don't recognize, but one word repeats Tlali Earth. They say it the way you might say home or again. You nod at them. They nod back. That's enough. You crouch again and notice something else hidden in the reeds, a tiny altar. Nothing grand, just a few pebbles arranged around a carved wooden figure barely the length of your palm. Maybe Tlaloc, the rain god, or Chicomacoatl, goddess of fertility and maize. The figure is smeared with something sticky sap, honey blood. You decide not to get closer. Historians still argue whether Chinampa farming was strictly practical or also deeply spiritual. Were the gardens temples as much as granaries? Or did necessity alone drive their creation? The answer seems to be yes. You move on, and with each step the world brightens. The waterbirds begin their strange laughter, those wild cackles that sound like they're mocking you but might just be breakfast negotiations. A heron stalks by with aristocratic disdain, stepping carefully between the cabbages as if invited. And then a bridge. Well, not a bridge exactly, more like two canoes lashed together with woven mats spread between. You test it, and it doesn't collapse. Always a win. You cross over, and this new Chinampa feels slightly different, flatter, broader, with more rows and fewer trees. This one's more exposed, more orderly. A student's plot, perhaps, or an experimental field. You kneel beside a row of marigolds. Not food, but still welcome. They were used for rituals, medicine, even dyes. Plus they look happy, don't they? Their petals like golden fireworks, early morning celebration. As you breathe in the scent, warm and slightly peppery, your mind wanders to the broader system of these gardens. They weren't randomly placed. The Aztecs created grids, networks of canals, and raised beds with measured dimensions, spacing the gardens just right for sunlight, irrigation, and boat passage. It wasn't just farming, it was urban planning for plants. Quirky fact time. Some Chinampa owners trained frogs to croak at dusk. Why? Because frog song was considered good luck, an audible blessing for abundant harvest. Imagine that a choir of amphibians serenading the beans into ripeness. You smirk at the thought. Then you hear it drums. Not war drums, don't worry. Just the slow thump of a morning rhythm coming from the direction of Tenochtitlan itself. Someone is greeting the sun. Maybe a priest. Maybe a child with a stick and a log. The sound carries over the water like a heartbeat in a bath. You sit legs folded, watching the sky bloom into gold. Here the gardens don't end. They stretch mile after mile, lacing the lake like embroidery. You imagine flying above it all, a checkerboard of green, blue and mist, with people gliding like insects on glossy wings. And you begin to see it differently, not as farmland, not as swamp, but as memory. A technology written in living ink, updated each day with roots and water. You lie back again, the Chinampa cradling you, and watch the clouds march slowly overhead as if taking attendance. A bee lands on your knee. You both stay still. For once, no one's in a hurry. The bee finally buzzes away, as if giving you a nod of approval for your patient stillness. You stretch a little your back, easing into the soft hum of the Chinampa beneath you. It's easy to forget that this isn't just a garden. This is part of a living, floating city. You've only just begun to scratch the surface, because now you push up to your feet, and your eyes drift toward the horizon where the early morning sun glimmers off a shimmering gridwork of canals. The lake itself, Texcoco, was once ringed with dozens of these Chinampa networks, but it's time to wander inward, closer to the epicenter. You follow a narrow canal toward the heart of Tenochtitlan. The water is so still it feels like glass pulled over memory. Your canoe glides along without a ripple. A dragonfly hovers nearby, its wings catching the light like broken stained glass. As you pass, you spot more plots, filled with squash blossoms, amaranth and tomato vines curling around hand-carved stakes. There's even a section filled with herbs, epazote sage, maybe a sprig or two of something that smells suspiciously like ancient cilantro. Mainstream historical fact, the Aztecs cultivated an extraordinary range of crops on these floating gardens. Over 50 edible plants in constant rotation with a layered system that mimicked forest canopies. Tall maize would provide shade, while lower-growing beans enriched the soil. No modern fertilizers required. And did you know they didn't plow, no heavy tilling or back-breaking oxen work here? Instead, these gardeners used a type of dibble stick, a sharpened wooden rod to gently poke holes in the soil and drop in seeds. It was a quiet, meditative kind of agriculture. You could practically whisper your way through a season. The path winds closer to a set of narrow, stacked walkways made of reed mats laid over floating logs. You balance carefully as you pass a group of farmers chatting in low tones. Their heads are wrapped in cotton scarves, and one of them holds a conch shell in his hands, not for decoration, but for summoning help if a canal collapses. Fringe tidbit. Some Chinampa farmers believed that whispering kind words to their maize, yes, literally complimenting the corn, would produce sweeter kernels. Was it science? Faith? Maybe both. One farmer in a dusty tunic coos at a stalk like it's his grandchild. You raise an eyebrow. He catches your gaze and shrugs as if to say, "Don't knock it till you've tried it." The water ahead begins to widen, revealing a view of central Tenochtitlan. Buildings rise in the distance, pyramids, markets, temples, but all of them look like they're floating too. Even the city's most sacred spaces were connected by water, which meant that the Chainampas weren't separate from urban life. They were the lungs and limbs of the metropolis. You dock near a wooden platform tied to a grove of willow trees and step onto solid, semi-solid ground. Ahead is a storage hut woven from reed and painted with ochre patterns. Inside, bundles of dried maize hang from the ceiling alongside baskets of chili seeds and what looks like roasted axolotl. Yes, the little smiling salamanders. A delicacy if you were wondering. You watch as two workers begin their daily routine of cleaning and repairing the Chainampa edges. They pack fresh mud into the perimeter, retie loose bundles of reeds, and check for signs of erosion. Their movements are so practiced you could set a metronome by them. Historians still argue whether Chainampas were truly floating or just incredibly saturated islands built into shallow lake beds. The truth probably lies in between. Some floated, some didn't, but all were born of the same genius, a refusal to let water win. You step back outside and feel a breeze shift the cattails. For a moment it smells like earth after rain, and maybe, just maybe, like tortillas somewhere nearby. Your stomach growls and the canal answers with a soft gurgle. Then you notice it. A canoe approaches piled high with fresh produce. Squash the colour of sunrise tomatoes, like glowing rubies, chilies as red as festival banners. The vendor, a wiry man, with sun-darkened skin and eyes like polished obsidian waves. His daughter perched at the front tosses you a small bunch of flowers wrapped in maize husk, marigolds and wild herbs, a floating bouquet. You nod your thanks and hold the gift like it's sacred, because here it might be. They drift past humming a soft tune. The words are lost on the wind, but the feeling remains something between lullaby and lull in time. You sit back down cross-legged now, beside a patch of young maize just breaking through the soil. You run your fingers through the dirt. It's rich, alive, almost warm, a compost of centuries. Remember how we said these weren't just farms, they were calendars too, markers of season story and spirit. The rise and fall of certain crops signaled more than harvests. They marked religious festivals, social obligations, even tax collection days. Yes, taxes existed even in paradise. And guess what? They weren't always paid in coins or currency. Often tribute came in the form of harvested produce, baskets of beans, garlands of herbs, even frogs stuffed into pottery jars. Imagine trying to file that with the IRS. You chuckle and a frog nearby croaks in response. Coincidence maybe, but it's a good reminder that out here, everything listens. You lie back again, and this time, you don't open your eyes for a while. The breeze brushes your cheek. The maize whispers above. The lake holds its breath beneath you. You're still, held, not just by water and mud, but by time. And even though you know it's morning now, you don't mind lingering a bit longer in the in-between. You don't move just yet. There's a kind of weightless gravity here, one that invites stillness. The Chainampa beneath you rocks ever so gently, not from the wind, but from the rhythm of unseen hands at work all around the lake. It's as if the floating farms breathe with the city, each ripple an inhale, each creak an exhale. Eventually, your curiosity stirs you up again. You stand and begin walking the reed pathway back toward one of the canal junctions. Today you're going deeper, not just into the Chinampa system, but into the cultural roots behind it. Because while the engineering is stunning, the belief system that nurtured it might just be even more remarkable. You pass a young woman stooped in prayer at the edge of a plot. She wears a skirt dyed with cochineal red and a blouse tied over one shoulder. She's not farming, she's whispering something to the maize, maybe a prayer or a promise. Behind her, a small clay idol is nestled into the base of a tree, its surface worn smooth by time and touch. Mainstream historical fact, the Aztecs believed that every plant had a tonalí, a kind of spirit or animating force connected to the gods. Maize wasn't just food, it was sacred. Every harvest was a ceremony, every planting a renewal of cosmic contract. You didn't just grow corn, you communed with it. And of course, the central deity of this entire floating rhythm was Tlaloc, god of rain fertility, and if you dared to cross him, floods. His temples weren't just on dry land. Some were built on islands, or even Chinampus themselves. After all, if you want rain, why not build your church on water? You cross paths with an elder woman, balancing a shallow basket filled with amaranth cakes and tiny pottery figures. She gives you a knowing smile and disappears down a narrow trail into the mist. For a moment, it feels like she wasn't entirely human, maybe a vision, maybe a memory. Then again, you haven't eaten anything since sunrise. You shake it off and continue. Now the canals around you are busier. This is closer to a market hub where trading canoes glide past each other like choreographed swans. Some carry vibrant textiles, others are loaded with firewood or obsidian tools. One boat stacked with cages of turkeys and bundles of smoked fish smells. Pungent. You quickly sidestep onto a quieter embankment and breathe through your mouth. The market here is amphibious, half on land, half on anchored Chinampus. A floating bazaar. You wander between stalls built of woven cane and cloth, admiring the goods' painted gourds, spice jars, ceremonial fans made of feathers so bright they look enchanted. And amid it all, the quiet logic of bartering a bundle of maize for a hand-woven net, 2 frogs for a bone needle. Fringe, tidbit, salt cakes were once used as currency in some Aztec markets. Yes, literal blocks of salt, cut, stamped and traded like coins. You imagine slipping one into your wallet and smile. Probably melts if it rains. Not exactly inflation-proof. Near the edge of the market floats a small shrine, built atop an especially sturdy chinampa. Here, a priest, face painted with streaks of blue and black, tends a fire that never seems to go out. Around him, the remnants of rituals, feathers, charred seeds, even a tiny effigy made of maize dough. Historians still argue whether such rituals were purely symbolic or if they genuinely affected crop yields. Did blessing a seed truly grow a healthier plant? Or was it just about giving thanks in case it did? In a world where nature was divine, maybe the question didn't need answering. You pause near the shrine and listen. The priest hums a low tune, almost a lullaby. It's not for show, he doesn't even notice you. It's for the plants, the soil, the water, the gods, and maybe just maybe for himself. You move on back into the quiet maze of gardens. This section is older, you can feel it. The walkways are narrower, the trees taller, the reeds woven tighter, like they've been repaired 100 times by hands now gone. A heron perches nearby, one leg tucked into its feathers. It watches you with regal disinterest. You take another path, this one lined with drying maize husks strung like garlands. A breeze sets them rustling. It sounds like distant applause. You come to a bench well a plank, balanced on 2 clay jars, and sit. The sun has begun to arc downward. Shadows stretch across the water. Somewhere in the distance, a flute plays. Or is it just the wind? You think again of the belief system beneath this floating world. It wasn't just religion. It was ecosystem, economy, social order. The gods weren't up in the sky watching from afar. They were in the soil, in the water, in the paddle stroke, in the blossom, even in the pests. Because, fun fact, Aztec farmers sometimes believed that particularly persistent insects were divine tests. You weren't supposed to crush them in anger. You were supposed to negotiate. Yes, negotiate. One legend speaks of a man who sprinkled crushed chili around a pest-infested chinampa and politely asked the bugs to leave. They did, probably offended. You smile and stretch. Your feet dangle just above the water. Somewhere below, a fish jumps and a turtle plops lazily off a log. You lean back and let the hush fall over you again. Somewhere behind your eyes, you feel the shape of it all. The geometry of floating islands, the lines of prayer stitched into the soil, the pulse of life beating under planks and petals alike. It's not just a garden. It's a map of a world view, and you're walking across it barefoot and blinking in the late day light. You shift your weight on the plank bench, the clay jars beneath it groaning just enough to remind you they weren't exactly engineered for ergonomic lounging. Still, you stay seated for a moment longer, gazing out over the water. There's a serene symmetry to everything here, like the lake itself is holding its breath, balanced between sky and earth. If you listen closely, even the insects seem to hum in harmony. Eventually you rise and begin to meander toward one of the quieter canals, drawn not by sound this time, but by a gentle scent, something herbal, earthy and faintly sweet. You follow it the way you'd follow a memory, trusting it to lead somewhere worth going. And it does. What you stumble into next is something the modern world would label a research station, but here, in this watery green maze, it's simply known as a gathering hut, a place where older gardeners teach the younger ones how to read the water and the sky. Mainstream historical fact: Aztec farmers weren't just gardeners, they were scientists in every sense of the word. They practiced sophisticated crop rotation systems, developed composting strategies with lake silt and decayed vegetation, and even bred resilient seed varieties long before such phrases would ever show up in a peer-reviewed journal. Some Chinampas historians believe produced up to 7 harvests a year. 7. Your stomach makes a noise that confirms it has learned this fact too. You move on quickly before someone suggests you sign up for a volunteer shift. Inside the hut, you find an elder named Sipakli, named after a mythological crocodile beast. Though you quickly realize the only thing this man has in common with his namesake is a set of teeth like riverstone gravel. He's busy tying stalks of amaranth into neat bundles and explaining mostly to himself how the wind changes the flavor of chili peppers if harvested on a cloudy day. You take a seat in the back. The hut smells like smoke-wet earth and roasted squash. It's comforting, like the inside of a story. Someone asks him why some Chinampas have willow trees planted at each corner. Without even pausing his bundle tying, Kapakli mutters, "They anchor the soul just as they anchor the soil." Then with a sideways glance, "And they keep the gods from drifting away." Fringe tidbit: some Chinampa farmers believed that if they didn't plant willows, their floating gardens would wander off in the night. Imagine waking up to find your entire farm has floated into someone else's territory. "Excuse me, I think you're growing tomatoes on my ancestors." You laugh quietly to yourself. No one notices. Or if they do, they choose not to notice. There's a lovely etiquette to dreaming in groups here. Sipakli moves on to another tale, one about the Tlaloque, minor rain deities said to live inside the clouds, each assigned to a specific type of rain. There's cheerful rain, sobbing rain, jealous rain, and even the kind of drizzle that ruins picnics but doesn't help the crops. We're not supposed to ask them for help, unless we really mean it, he adds. The last time someone did, they got a week of jealous rain and soggy sandals. Historians still argue whether these myths were used as literal belief systems or as teaching metaphors for young farmers. Maybe both, maybe neither. Maybe the rain was just rain, and maybe the gods were just weather in disguise. You slip out of the hut as the sun begins to lean low in the sky, painting everything in a buttery glaze. The light turns reeds into gold water, into polished obsidian. A breeze lifts the edge of your sleeve like an invisible friend trying to hold your hand. You follow a narrow causeway now, one barely wide enough for a canoe, but still somehow bearing the tracks of 1,000 bare feet. It leads to one of the oldest Chinampas, an ancestral garden reserved for special ceremonies. No market sounds here, just birdsong and the occasional plunk of a frog testing gravity. This is where they come to bless the first harvest, to ask forgiveness before cutting down a plant, and to bury offerings in little clay jars, beads, feathers, even teeth. Human maybe. You decide not to ask. You spot a row of raised beds half submerged and beautifully overgrown. This section hasn't been harvested in years. Vines crawl over everything, claiming tools, trellises, even an old canoe now used by nesting ducks. You pause by a stalk of maize nearly twice your height. Its silk shimmers like copper thread, and then you see it half buried in the mud, a small painted disc. You brush it off. It's a shard of pottery still bearing the faded blue outline of a serpent. You sit there for a while, the shard resting in your palm, the lake catching the last of the daylight like a mirror too wise to show your reflection clearly. What were they thinking, those gardeners 1,000 years ago, as they tended these floating plots? Were they worried about yield or rain? Were they wondering what would happen if their children forgot the prayers? You feel a sudden urge to whisper a thank you, not because you believe necessarily, but because it feels right. Like shaking hands with the past before heading home. You place the shard gently back in the soil and stand. You step away from the overgrown plot, brushing damp soil from your palms. The ground is springy here, like walking on the belly of a very sleepy giant. A few dragonflies flit past your ear, their wings catching the last slivers of amber light. Somewhere to your left, the soft splash of a paddle reminds you you're not alone on this lake. You never were. As you walk along a narrow channel bordered by flowering reeds, the rhythm of the Chinampas changes. Here, things are less ceremonial and more practical. Farmers in simple tunics pull up baskets filled with moist, dark soil so rich it smells alive. One man laughs and flicks a worm toward a friend, who flinches theatrically, then tosses back a handful of duckweed in revenge. Apparently, farming jokes transcend time. Mainstream historical fact, these farmers are dredging lakebed mud, known as tapexli, which they pile onto the Chinampas to renew fertility. This nutrient-rich sludge, combined with rotting vegetation and manure, creates a self-sustaining ecosystem. In other words, they compost before composting was cool. But the real secret, the Aztecs created artificial islands that didn't just float, they grew stronger over time. By anchoring these soil rafts with willow trees and enclosing them in reed fences, they built permanent elevated farms in the middle of a lake. With every season, the Chinampas became more solid, more bountiful, living proof that you don't need to conquer nature to thrive in it. You squat beside an elderly woman who's calmly untangling her fishing net. Do the Chinampas ever sink, you ask, half joking. She smiles without looking up. Only when the gods are hungry. She flicks a fish scale off her sleeve and continues working. Fringe, tidbit, some legends claim that Chinampas are fed offerings a drop of blood, a lock of hair, to keep them from becoming restless. One boy nearby says his grandmother told him the Chinampa she gardens on gets annoyed if she skips planting marigolds in the corners. It floats a little crooked for days, he whispers wide-eyed. Like a grumpy boat. Historians still argue whether the Chinampa system was as widespread and productive as Aztec records claim. Spanish chroniclers were famously dramatic and just a tad biased. But even skeptical archaeologists agree this was no small feat. Some calculations suggest that the Chinampa network around Lake Xochimilco alone could have fed over 200,000 people. That's a lot of corn tortillas or tamales if you're feeling ambitious. You pause at the edge of a wide canal watching a small boat filled with firewood drift lazily toward the city. The oarsman waves once and disappears behind a cluster of blooming trees. His cargo smells of pine and pepperwood, probably headed to the steam house. That gives you an idea. You veer off the path and follow a trail of footprints pressed into damp loam. The prints are unusually wide and close together, made by someone moving slow, maybe carrying something heavy. Soon you find yourself in front of a domed hut, half hidden by reeds. A curl of steam rises from the roof. You've found a temazcal, a Mesoamerican sweat lodge. You hesitate, but an old woman opens the door flap with a kind nod. Too many thoughts, she says simply, and gestures you inside. The air within is thick with heat and eucalyptus. You kneel on a woven mat, your forehead already glistening. In one corner, glowing stones hiss beneath ladles of herb-infused water. A man chants softly words that taste like wind and smoke and obsidian. You breathe. Your muscles soften like wet clay. Your mind, once filled with logistics of crop rotation and floating islands, now floats too, drifting through the memory of those shimmering fields, the whisper of willows, and the odd joke about jealous rain. Then in the low flicker of the firelight, you see a mural etched into the curved wall. It's simple, but precise, a series of boats gliding through crops, hands, planting seeds, birds flying low over cornfields. At the center, a single floating island crowned by a maize goddess, her dress trailing into the lake like roots. You close your eyes, and time folds. You're no longer a visitor. You're part of this world now, skin warmed by the same sun, feet cooled by the same water lungs filled with the same breath the Chinampas have known for centuries. The woman taps your shoulder gently, offering a small gourd of cold water. You drink it all in one go. It tastes faintly of mint clay and quiet things. You step back into the night. The stars above seem brighter now, as though the sweat and steam stripped away a layer of fog between you and the sky. A canoe drifts past silently. You follow the shoreline slower now, your feet aware of every pebble, every root. You pass a man sprinkling crushed chili onto drying corn cakes. You pass two children trying to catch fireflies in a hollowed gourd. You pass a tree so old its roots look like sleeping serpents. All the while the Chinampas wait, still breathing, remembering. They are not relics. They are not ruins. They are gardens that float and float and float still. The morning mist curls low over the water, turning the surface into a sheet of pearled glass. You wake to the soft creaking of ropes and the distant call of a heron. The Chinampas stretch around you like a lazy maze, green corridors stitched together by water and roots and time. A fisherman poles by singing off-key about a tomato that betrayed him. You chuckle. Apparently, even ancient agriculture has drama. You sit cross-legged beneath a fig tree and watch a group of young farmers push a raft of seedlings through the reeds. They're humming a rhythm older than language hands, moving in practiced unison. The raft carries baskets filled with young maize amaranth and beans, the so-called three sisters of Mesoamerican agriculture. Together, they feed each other corn, grows tall, and gives the beans a place to climb, while the beans return nitrogen to the soil and squash sprawls low, shading out weeds. Mainstream historical fact, this interplanting method wasn't just clever, it was deeply sustainable. Aztec farmers understood soil health centuries before the phrase carbon footprint would become a thing. Some scholars estimate that Chinampa farming yielded up to 7 harvests per year, far surpassing the productivity of European plots at the time. And it wasn't just food. They grew medicinal herbs, flowers, like marigolds for offerings, and plants used for dyes, like cochineal and indigo. In fact, one whole section of the Chinampas, near Xochimilco, was reserved for florists, people who grew arrangements for temples, nobles, and those dramatic funerals where mourners wailed so loud they scared the dogs. Fringe, tidbit Aztec Chinamperos sometimes whispered to their crops. Not just grow well, little bean, but full-on conversations, telling jokes, confessing secrets, and apologizing before harvest. A few even swore the maize responded better if you asked permission. Whether it worked or not, it's kind of beautiful. And let's be honest, talking to plants isn't that much stranger than talking to your Wi-Fi router. You wander past a shaded cove where bundles of reeds dry in the sun. They're destined for fences, roof thatch, and something called a petlattle, a woven mat that serves as both bed and table. One craftsman gestures for you to sit beside him, offering a strand of fibre. You give weaving a go, but your mat comes out looking more like a sea creature than furniture. He pats your shoulder kindly and whispers, "Good for catching fish, maybe." Historians still argue whether Chinampa farming originated purely with the Aztecs, or if they adapted it from earlier Mesoamerican cultures like the Xochimilco. The truth is probably somewhere in between, a blend of innovation inheritance and good old-fashioned trial and error. What we do know is that by the time the Spanish arrived, this system was a marvel envied even by conquerors who barely understood it. Suddenly, you're swept into the bustle of the tianguis, the floating market. Yes, floating. Boats tethered like stools bob gently as vendors hawk chilies, avocados, obsidian knives, and amaranth sweets shaped like skulls. The scent of fresh cacao wafts through the air, mingling with roasted maize and something vaguely like cinnamon. You spot a woman selling water gourds engraved with tiny feathered serpents. Another offers a basket of axolotls, those strange smiling salamanders sacred to Xolotl, the god of lightning and misfortune. You consider buying one, but it blinks at you with the weary eyes of someone who's seen too much. Children laugh nearby, playing a game that involves tossing pebbles into a floating lily pad. One pad twitches, then shifts. Turns out it's not a lily pad at all, but a cleverly camouflaged turtle. The kids shriek with delight. The turtle rolls its eyes and disappears under the water, probably muttering something about privacy. You board a vendor's canoe and sit cross-legged as she paddles you along a slow channel. She's selling chapulines, toasted grasshoppers, dusted with lime and chili. You pop one into your mouth. It crunches like a sour sunflower seed that went to military school. Not bad. "Best protein in the valley," she says proudly, waving her paddle like a scepter. As you drift past a larger barge, decked with feathers, textiles, and bundles of flowers, a young man calls out, "For your ancestors." He throws you a marigold bloom, and you catch it startled by its weight. He grins. They like to be remembered. You look down at the marigold in your hand and remember the stories from earlier. Chinampas that tilt if not gifted a flower. Boats that refuse to move unless spoken to gently. It sounds ridiculous, but the water here has memory. It knows when it's been forgotten. You trail your fingers along the surface. A soft breeze ripples the canal. You lean back, gaze upward. A dragonfly lands on your knee, balanced as though it too wants to listen. The afternoon sun slants low, its golden reflection dancing across the canals, like scattered obsidian shards. You stretch your arms, legs dangling lazily off the edge of a flat-bottomed boat. The air is warm, tinged with the earthy perfume of damp soil and blooming water hyacinths. Somewhere nearby, someone is playing a flute, a slow, meandering melody that seems to weave itself through the reeds over the chinampas and into your very bones. You paddle gently forward, gliding between two parallel rows of flourishing greenery. Each plot floats but feels as steady as stone underfoot. You stop at a large chinampa, bordered with carefully planted willows, the ahuejote trees. They arch overhead like guardians, their roots anchoring the floating garden to the lake bed below. The roots also help stabilize the soil, forming a natural net that prevents erosion. Mainstream historical fact, these trees weren't randomly chosen. The ahuejotes are water-loving and fast-growing with shallow roots that work perfectly for soft, mucky soil. Without them, these floating gardens, some spanning over 100 feet, would crumble into the water. And while they look like little islands, they're engineered masterpieces. Quirky tidbit. Some chinampas were said to be so well tended, they sprouted little ecosystems complete with pet ducks, semi-domesticated turtles, and the occasional visiting egret, who acted like it owned the place. In fact, you notice one now, a grumpy bird glaring at you from atop a pile of gourds. You tip your hat. It does not nod back. You step onto the chinampa and crouch beside a farmer planting maize. He works quickly, rhythmically. Corn, bean, squash. Corn, bean, squash. He tells you that the gods must be kept busy if they see you idle. He adds with a wink. They send rain or frogs, whichever's worse. You nod solemnly, unsure which option sounds more alarming. As you move along this canal, you reach a larger plot with clay markers etched in simple glyphs. Maize ears, a water droplet, a jaguar's paw. The farmer explains, these are records of planting cycles, and offerings a form of agricultural bookkeeping. A reminder to the gods and to the family which plot bore fruit, which one needs rest, and which has already received enough song. Historians still argue whether the chinampa plots were managed by individuals, communal groups, or state-appointed caretakers. Some sources point to noble ownership. Others suggest village-wide cooperation, almost like an HOA without the passive-aggressive letters. Most likely it was a flexible mix, some plots for taxes, some for trade, and some for personal joy, like growing flowers that no one eats but everyone loves. You're offered a tamal wrapped in banana leaf filled with bright orange squash and seasoned with epazote. You take a bite. It's sweet, savoury, and against all logic, faintly smoky. As you chew, an elder waves you over and gestures at a square sunken pit beside the canal. Inside, tiny green sprouts poke through the mud. Seed nurseries, she says. The children of the chinampas. You lean closer. The seedlings are so small, so fragile. It's like looking at the future in lowercase letters. Farther down, another elder invites you to watch a tlaloku ceremony. This one's small, just a family gathered under a willow placing maize cakes and flower petals into the water. They sing to Tlaloc, the rain, God asking for mild storms, not the wild tantrums that flatten crops and flood homes. The elder catches your eye. If you treat the land like your cousin, she says, it brings you beans. If you treat it like your enemy, it brings you mud. Fair point. You return to your boat and push away from shore, drifting slowly now, the air thick with twilight. A bat skims the water beside you, chasing mosquitoes. Somewhere in the reeds, frogs start their nightly gossip, loud, unapologetic and rhythmic. You can't understand their language, but they definitely sound judgmental. Up ahead you see something glowing. A line of bioluminescent mushrooms, tiny ghostly dots, clustered near the edge of a shaded chinampa. The farmer there says they only appear after a certain kind of storm. They remember what we forget, he mutters, then returns to humming. You lean your head back and notice the stars peeking through the dusk. The sky above Lake Xochimilco is wide and open, as if the gods paused their errands just to admire the view. You think about the hundreds, maybe thousands of chinampas that once floated here, each one a breath of life stitched into water. As the boat drifts past another garden, you spot a stone marker carved with a jaguar. The guide whispers, some say chinampas stretch all the way to the underworld. That's why you plant carefully, you never know who's watching from below. You laugh nervously. Maybe the frogs are watching, maybe the axolotls, or maybe the earth itself. You stretch out on your back arms behind your head. The boat rocks gently. The flute song returns distant but clear. Sleep tugs at your eyelids. A firefly lands on your sleeve. The stars above shimmer like seeds waiting to be sown. You wake to the sound of paddles gently brushing the water. A low, splash-swish rhythm that seems to beat in time with your breath. The stars are still scattered above, like maize thrown across obsidian stone, and the night air is cool against your skin. You sit up in your boat, stretching as the soft silhouette of the chinampa edges appears ahead, darker patches on the shimmering lake, each one thick with life and memory. A young farmer waits for you on the edge of a nearby chinampa, waving you over with an easy smile. He's crouched beside a wooden lattice suspended in the water, busy extracting something with great care. Bundles of spiral-shaped aquatic roots. We use these to bind the soil mats, he explains, like stitching a quilt with living thread. You lean in and touch one. It's cool, flexible, and faintly sticky like nature's Velcro. Mainstream historical fact, the Aztecs, or more accurately, the Mexica people, developed this layered system of weaving reeds, mud and roots over centuries. Each chinampa wasn't just floating, it was semi-anchored, part of a living infrastructure, built on generations of experimentation, observation, and divine superstition. It's a farming technique so efficient, it's been called the most productive per-acre agriculture system of the ancient world. Quirky tidbit. According to oral legend, a mischievous monkey once planted only chili peppers across a chinampa, ignoring his grandmother's instructions. When the rains came, the entire neighborhood cried every time they cooked. To this day, kids are reminded not to chili up the neighborhood. You imagine being cursed with involuntary salsa inhalation. Hilarious until you realize, yeah, probably happened. You drift toward the edge of a ceremonial chinampa, one not used for planting, but for reflection. It's dotted with obsidian statues, small wooden effigies of water deities, and a strange circle of polished turtle shells. A quiet man sits cross-legged in the middle, humming. You approach softly. He points to a tree whose bark has been carved with tiny symbols, spirals, raindrops, maize kernels. Glyphs of harvest moons, he whispers, messages to the spirits, and perhaps to the future. You nod, then ask if he believes the chinampas remember. He doesn't answer with words, just pats the ground, inviting you to sit beside him. So you do. The soil is warmer than you expect, as if the lake itself is breathing beneath you. As the morning light softens the horizon, activity stirs. You watch as families arrive in small boats, bringing compost seedlings, even offerings. Children leap from boats to land like practiced acrobats. Women unwrap food parcels. Men begin checking for pests. It's a coordinated ballet without a script, and you realize these farms are not just tools of survival, but deeply integrated into daily family life. You help spread a layer of dried lakeweed across the chinampa. It's slimy, yes, but rich in nutrients. A laughing elder nearby hands you a basket of axolotl droppings, grinning. Magic fertilizer, he says. They give, they swim, they disappear. You pause, unsure whether he means metaphorically or literally. You also wonder if the axolotls know this is part of the deal. Historians still argue whether these floating gardens were developed independently or borrowed from older Toltec or Teotihuacan systems. The Mexica were brilliant adapters, it's true, but there are signs that the idea of building farmland from lake beds stretches back much further than Tenochtitlan's rise. Perhaps these gardens were the inheritance of lake civilizations long drowned and long forgotten, their memories soaked into the mud like old secrets. You paddle onward, crossing a network of crisscrossing canals that create a woven grid across the lake. This isn't random. It's engineered urban agriculture, laid out to maximize sun exposure, water access, and harvest efficiency. Every plot has purpose. Every turn has memory. As you turn into a wider canal, you notice something strange. A stone platform shaped like a turtle. On it rests a wooden throne. An elder explains, this is where the lake priests once watched over the plantings, reciting the Tonalpohualli, the sacred calendar. She presses a seed into your hand. Every seed remembers its birthday, she says. You move on, holding the seed like a whisper in your palm, and then a distant chant. You drift toward it, pulled by the rhythm of low melodic voices. You reach a communal gathering. The tlaquilos, or painters and scribes, have gathered on a ceremonial chinampa. They paint the chinampas themselves, not just on parchment, but directly on the wooden walkways and bark of trees, leaving marks of harvests, family symbols and weather patterns. One scribe is working on a large clay-coated slab, depicting the entire lake system as a jaguar. The canals forming its bones, the chinampas its spots. The land is an animal, he says. You must feed it and fear it equally. You lean closer. At the jaguar's eye is a spiral glyph, the symbol for Teotihuacan's city of gods. They say this all started there, he continues. A farmer who had a dream of floating maize. The gods laughed, so he built it anyway. You return to your boat. The day is ending, the sky turning tangerine and lavender. You paddle in slow, broad circles, now the breeze lightly tugging your hair. You pass under a low arch formed by two intertwining willows and feel for just a second like you've passed into a story not written yet. There's one last chinampa ahead. A woman is placing corn dolls in the water, whispering thanks. You recognize her from earlier, though you never spoke. She turns and nods as if to say, yes, it's okay to rest now. And so you do. You awaken to dew forming on your arms and the faint rustling of reeds in the breeze. The lake's surface shimmers like polished obsidian, perfectly still, except for the gentle ripples your boat makes as it glides through the water. Your hands trail alongside fingers, grazing the cool, silty surface, catching strands of algae that slip like silk. Ahead lies the last of the Chinampa districts, a place few outsiders ever reach. It's older here. The willows grow taller, their roots thick with time. The birdsong changes too, not the chirping of morning, but the low echoing calls of lake herons and black-crowned nightbirds. You pass a pair of farmers poling their way past you without a word, their baskets heavy with fish and lake greens. One of them carries a living net made not from thread but from woven reeds, and lily stems, an ancient technique that somehow still works better than nylon. Mainstream historical fact, these floating farms weren't just about vegetables. Aquatic resource integration was essential. Fish, waterfowl, frogs, and even insects were harvested as food and traded across the empire. Every inch of the lake was either grown caught or ritualized. In fact, some chinampas were designed solely for fish nurseries, early aquaponics if you will. You come upon a shrine dedicated to Calchutlika, goddess of lakes and running water. A little boy is gently pouring water over the statue's feet while whispering a rhyme. May the water rise, but never flood. May the mud feed, but never swallow. His grandmother watches with a smile. We always ask the lake's permission, she says. Even gods can be tired. You ask whether the gods ever said no. She thinks a moment. They whisper. Then the wind comes, and then we know. Quirky tidbit, some Chinampa communities used to bury ears of maize wrapped in cloth near the edge of their plots before big storms. It was believed that maize could talk to the water old maize, especially. The older the kernel, the louder it spoke. So in a storm, you'd want your most wrinkled corn pleading your case. Today they call that abuela maize. You pass what looks like a classroom, though there are no walls. Just children gathered around a teacher who's teaching them how to map a canal system using only dried reeds and pebbles. They lay them in patterns across the muddy soil, narrating routes like city planners of the lake. One child points to your boat. He's going the wrong way. He laughs. You wave sheepishly, knowing full well you've been gliding in circles. Historians still argue whether these water-based systems would have survived the arrival of the Spanish had things gone differently. Some say the technology was too fragile, dependent on intimate local knowledge that couldn't be scaled. Others argue that had it been embraced, Mesoamerican lake farming could have transformed colonial agriculture entirely, saving ecosystems rather than draining them. You reach a final Chinampa one left, intentionally untended. It's covered in wildflowers and overgrowth, buzzing with bees. An elderly woman explains that it's a resting Chinampa, allowed to rewild and remember who it is. She picks a blue flower and tucks it behind your ear. This one feeds hummingbirds, she says. We plant for them too. She invites you to sit and eat. You share salted lake greens, wrapped in maize leaves spiced with chili and honey. It's simple and delicious. The lake feeds us when we stop trying to own it, she says, gesturing to the water. It just wants to be seen. You look across the lake. Mist is curling up from its surface like steam from a bowl. Everything feels circular here. The paths, the farms, the beliefs. Nothing is wasted. Nothing is hurried. You realize that in this quiet choreography of mud, water and willpower, entire civilizations thrived without machinery, without engines, just ingenuity, intuition, and a very patient lake. And then it's time. Your boat drifts gently into a grove of tamarisk trees, their branches arching protectively overhead. You lie back and stare up at the sky, which is now a pale canvas of blue and lavender stretched wide above you. A dragonfly lands on your chest, flicks its wings once and zips off. The last thing you hear before sleep overtakes you is the soft swaying of willow branches, a lullaby of leaves and water whispered in a language only lakes remember. Word count 174, 300. Word wind down begins below. Now as the story comes to a close, let your breath slow and soften. The lake still stretches around you, timeless and still, its gentle waves lapping like a heartbeat against the earth. You're wrapped in the memory of floating gardens and moonlit canals, of hands in soil and boats that glide like dreams. Let yourself imagine the scent of wet earth, the warmth of early sun on your skin, the rustle of reeds as the wind passes through. Hear the voices fade to a quiet hum, a child's laughter in the distance, a paddle slipping into water, the low croon of nightbirds finding rest. You're not just hearing this, you're there, held softly between mist and moonlight. Whatever you carried with you into this night, let it sink gently into the water now. There's nothing more to do, no fields to plant, no canals to navigate, just rest, just this moment. Just the sound of silence growing roots. So close your eyes. Let your shoulders drop. Let your breath match the slow rhythm of the lake's tide. And if your dreams wander back to Chinampas, to floating islands, and silent prayers whispered to the water, that's okay. It means the lake has accepted you.